Welcome to this in-depth explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a deeply optimistic, genuinely growth-oriented perspective on human nature. We're talking about a psychological framework that completely flipped the script on how we view the human mind. Instead of obsessing over pathology and what's wrong with us, this approach zeroes in on our innate, basically boundless potential. But before we really get into the weeds here, I want you to ask yourself a pretty profound question. Seriously, think about this. Are we all just biological machines, hopelessly reacting to our environment, or do we actually possess the absolute free will to shape our own existence? It's a massive, heavy question, right? But keeping that in the back of your mind is absolutely crucial as we unpack the humanistic approach. Because honestly, how you answer that question changes the entire game when it comes to mental health. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the third force, then meet the architects of humanism, dig into core concepts in therapy, look at a real-world scenario with David's case, and finally break down the strengths and limitations. All right, let's jump right into part one, the third force. Picture the psychology landscape in the 1940s and 50s. It was basically a two-party system dominated by psychoanalysis and behaviorism. Well, humanism crashed the party as a massive reaction against the limits of those older models. It actually earned the nickname the third force because it was this entirely new way of thinking. It flat out refused to look at humans as broken machines or just simple stimulus response organisms. And, fast forward to today, and it is still a massive, life-changing force in clinical therapy. The contrast here is just night and day. Those older, deterministic views basically argue that you're a hostage to your unconscious traumas or your environment. But humanism? It fiercely champions our absolute freedom, our own subjective experiences, and our personal responsibility to grow. It's just an incredibly optimistic way of looking at what it actually means to be human. Moving on to part two, the architects of humanism. These are the heavy hitters who really laid the philosophical groundwork. And each of them championed the human spirit in their own unique way. You've got Carl Rogers, who pioneered client-centered therapy on the belief that with the right relationship, we naturally gravitate toward health. There's Abraham Maslow, we all know his famous hierarchy of needs. And then you have the existentialists like Rollo May, who tackled existential angst, and Viktor Frankl. Frankl actually survived the Holocaust and went on to develop logotherapy, essentially proving that even in literally the darkest suffering imaginable, humans still hold on to this fundamental will to meaning. So tying this all together, the core assumption of humanism is that you and I have a driving, built-in need to reach our full creative potential. We call this self-actualization. And the coolest part, it's not something you have to force. It's automatic. Think about an acorn. You don't have to teach an acorn how to become an oak tree, right? It just needs the right soil and some sunlight, and it does the rest. Humanists believe that we are exactly the same way. But here's the catch. To actually reach that self-actualized potential, you need a really deep personal understanding of your own unique phenomenological world. And that brings us to your self-concept. This is essentially the organized set of beliefs you hold about who you are. To a humanist, your subjective experience, literally how you perceive your reality, is way more important than any objective external truth. So how do we actually grow a healthy self-concept? Well, for true growth to happen, we need an environment of deep empathy and absolute, genuine acceptance with zero judgment. Carl Rogers called this unconditional positive regard. It means valuing someone exactly as they are right now, without attaching any strings or conditions of worth. If you feel like you're only loved when you act a certain way, you're stifled. Unconditional positive regard is that sunlight the acorn needs to finally break through the soil. And this directly explains the root of so much of our mental distress. When we're in a state of congruence, everything just clicks. There's a beautiful harmony between our true, authentic self and our everyday experiences. But when we start denying who we really are or twisting our experiences just to win someone else's approval, that creates incongruence. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it leads to some pretty profound existential anxiety. This incongruence is exactly what drives most people to seek out therapy in the first place. Which brings us nicely to section 3, core concepts and therapy. When you step into a humanistic therapy session, the vibe is totally different. The therapist operates on a few radical assumptions. First, phenomenology. They want to truly grasp your unique perspective, not just check off a list of symptoms. Second, they believe in inherent goodness. They actually trust that you have the capability to heal yourself. And third, they are relentlessly present-centered. They aren't going to sit there acting like an expert doctor trying to dissect your childhood. They act as an authentic collaborator, hyper-focused on the here and now. Now, while they definitely steer clear of rigid clinical formulas, therapists do have some specific tools to help you reconnect with your own internal compass. Step 1 is always providing that unconditional positive regard. From there, they might use reflection and clarification, basically mirroring what you're saying so you can hear it and build your own self-awareness. If they're using Gestalt therapy, they might bring in the empty chair technique, where you literally talk to an imaginary person in a chair to get closure. Ultimately, the whole shebang is about tuning in to those moment-by-moment internal sensations. Let's see what this looks like in practice. Section 4, Real World, David's Case. So consider a guy named David. David came to therapy feeling totally and completely stuck in his marriage. During one of his sessions, he mentioned a dream where a friend of his was sinking into soggy ground. Now, a humanistic therapist didn't whip out a dream dictionary to give him some objective interpretation. Instead, the therapist used that vivid, striking imagery drawn straight from David's own mind to help him explore his intense, subjective dissatisfaction with where his life was at. Instead of slapping a clinical label on David or digging around for some repressed childhood trauma, they kept it right in the present. They tackled his existential responsibility and his moral duty. They had a real conversation about how David's choices were putting a ceiling, not just on his own life, but on his wife's life too, by expecting her to just stay home. By focusing entirely on growth-oriented choices and skipping the stigma of a diagnosis, David actually found the clarity he desperately needed to turn things around. Let's zoom out and look at the big picture for our final section. Part 5, Strengths and Limitations. The absolute superpower of humanism is its profound empathy. It is incredibly humane and completely avoids blaming the victim. This makes it a fantastic approach for things like depression, couples going through a rough patch, and especially for survivors of abuse. It creates this incredibly safe space for people dealing with generalized distress or identity crises. You know, the kind of messy human stuff that doesn't fit neatly into a clinical checkbox. But we have to be objective here. There are some definite limitations because early humanists kind of rejected the idea of turning human experience into raw data. There's a much smaller evidence base for treating specific syndromes like panic disorder, especially when you compare it to something heavily researched like CBT. Critics also point out reliability issues. How exactly do you scientifically measure something as subjective as self-actualization? And maybe most importantly, there's a strong cultural bias. Humanism places a huge premium on individual autonomy, which is a very Western ideal. That can really clash with collectivistic cultures that prioritize family duty and interdependence over individual self-focus. Ultimately, as we wrap up this in-depth explainer, the humanistic approach leaves us with a truly powerful reminder. It tells us that even when we are up against the absolute worst stressors life has to offer, if we can find a collaborative space where we are truly understood and accepted, every single one of us has the innate capacity to heal and to grow. So, I want to leave you with this. When you're facing down your own life's obstacles, are you ready to finally tap into your own vast inner resources? Keep questioning the limits of your potential.